9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Mark Polymeropoulos, and this is DSR's Above Average Intelligence Show. Today, I'm very happy to welcome as my guest, third time back, I think it's 3 now, Mr. Ed Bogan. Ed is a retired CIA operations officer and proven executive leader with 24 years of experience in national security and intelligence operations and policy, with a track record of providing tailored strategic insights and national security solutions across South Asia, Middle East, and Europe. He's a 2-time chief of station, a 3-time chief of base, with also extensive time as acting chiefs of station and acting chiefs of base across 4 other locations. Ed served 5 of his 7 PCS assignments that in our old world is our deployment, our 2 or 3 year assignments, sometimes 1 year assignments, but in 3 designated war and combat zones. All of his acting stints also in countries in armed conflict. He clearly did not like places like Paris or London. Kind of mirrored my career, where I never served in those places to the chagrin of my family. But Ed, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for mentioning Paris and London. I'm actually heading to both places over the next several days.
That's actually going to be good. What a great way to kind of start, because I think that we'll talk about today, the election, right? The effect on U.S. foreign policy, U.S. intelligence community. But I think one of the things that'll be interesting, and of course now we'll have to have you come back on, is how the world is watching us. I'm not going to go and catastrophize right now about the election, because I've done too much of that. On social media, I've actually moved away from Twitter. I can't take the algorithm there, so I'm on Blue Sky. But this is not going to be a catastrophizing 40 minutes, right? Because I want to just get into the substance. But I just on one note, I was just in Europe as well, and I certainly got an earful from journalists, academics, and former senior European intelligence officials. But we'll jump into that. So I guess the first question for you, and I'm certainly not going to, I won't get you in too much trouble now, because the politics of former intelligence officers is a touchy subject. I think I've long passed that, by the way. But I guess the question to you is, and this is going to be a loaded one, was the world watching? What did they see?
So in what way? Flesh that out just a little bit so I understand where you're going.
The American democratic experiment. And okay, let me kind of give you a little bit help here, because one of the things that you and I think, certainly believed in, I'll leave that in whether it's past or current or present tense, but was the notion of America as the bright shining city on the hill. Right. And so does that, maybe that's a better question, is does that still apply after the election results and certainly some of the more controversial cabinet picks?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an incredibly salient question. I mean, we had an election that was probably more polarized than anything we've seen in our lifetimes. I won't say the most polarized election ever. It's not realistic to make those kinds of assumptions. But the stakes, that were articulated by the sort of echo chambers on each side of the election were pretty stark and very different. Although there's a lot of commonality at certain times in terms of, like, is this, the end of democracy? Is this the end of, rule of law? And these are these are pretty primary fundamental questions. But the fact that we had an election, right, is the first part that says, okay, that undermines some of the arguments that say, okay, we're on a path, because I think you'll see that we've seen in the right wing echo chamber, they'll say, hey, the Biden administration, which they'll refer to, sort of like as a regime, is undermining rule of law and democracy. And then they see on left-wing echo chambers, you see similar things. And it's based on utterances. It's based on policy preferences. It's based on documents that come out. Like Project 2025 was a document. It was initially sort of bright light was shown on it. And then from sort of the Trump campaign, you saw from high level say, hey, like, this isn't what it's about. This isn't our platform. Then you see, an individual who's an author has now just been named as in a pretty key position. So you say, okay, this is interesting. Why am I raising all this? Was what we have, and I've said this to you before, is like there's a really critical need right now to separate signal from noise, because the noise was turned up, certainly in advance of the election. And I think deliberately, obviously by anyone trying to get into just to push whatever agenda, I think you're going to have the noise go up an incredible amount. So the issue to me is, what is the signal here? So the signals, are what? Individuals who are named as nominees. That's a signal, because that's a very public utterance. And we've seen definitely an interesting set of nominees in some of the positions that seem like individuals who, either, depending on what side you're on, going to say they have a mandate for change, or they have a mandate maybe to deconstruct the entity that they're going to manage. The devil's going to be in the details, but that's a hell of a devil to be considering. The other bits of signal that I think we've seen, in my view, are, there was some statements that President-elect made in the week after election, where they're like some are 2 to 4 minutes statements. And I think their policy preference signals pretty clear. Some of those talk about, how mis and disinformation will be funded or not funded going forward and handled as an issue. They'll talk about immigration. They'll talk about a wide array of topics. So I think that's the policy signals. And I try to separate that from the noise. And now the question then becomes, where does our system maintain checks and balances, and where does it maybe not? And so far, what we see is, the discussion about, who's going to be leading the Senate happened quickly, and it seems to be an expression of some independence of the chamber. And I think that's powerful argument in favor of rule of law, sort of checks and balances, having, guardrails going forward. Now, the second thing, we saw was, sort of seeing some of the individuals who are named into like committee positions, or seating like Mitch McConnell, what is, as an example of some of the positions he's already been named for going into the next seated Senate. It introduces, or it reinforces, the independence of the chamber of the Senate. So I think those things are signals. I think there's a lot of noise. Doesn't mean the noise shouldn't be watched. I'm just saying it's overwhelmingly high volume, and can really overwhelm your senses in a way that may not keep you close to what's actually going to happen.
So I guess so I hear you on that, and I think there was some, Axios and New York Times kind of wrote these pieces saying that kind of this is a liberal Trump cabinet, which I found a bit ludicrous, because they are pointing to some conventional picks like a Marco Rubio, and even National Security Advisor Waltz. I mean, these are and Waltz is not someone who has to be confirmed, but I think everyone is relatively comfortable with those things. But I think that when you talk about signals, a couple things. Well, first, even before the picks, there's this notion of the Trump administration might not require FBI background checks, which is pretty alarming. Yeah. And something, especially coming from you and I, where we actually, that was our kind of a fundamental part of getting the job and keeping the job, is you have not only initial background checks, but then you have repeated ones, including the polygraph and all sorts of intrusive things. And the idea that national security professionals are not going to be required to have these, I think that's a signal that is pretty damn alarming. And
if it comes to pass, yeah, absolutely. Like, if we're seeing someone at the highest level saying this is going to be our policy going forward, that's a clear signal. That's problematic, because that doesn't, the system's held together, and people are going to argue that the system needs to be reviewed, right? And there's always things that can be improved at any given time. But I think the integrity of the system is about the people, and the people's integrity needs to be held up through the systems that we have with respect to background checks, clearances, and maintaining a steady vetting process going forward. If individuals are circumvented from doing that, that's, to me, when it actually happens, that's a highly problematic signal. If it doesn't happen, if it gets countered, then it goes back into the noise category.
Right, and to be fair, these are still newspaper articles. We're still not sure. But what we are sure about, well, let's kind of jump into some of these picks. I think Ratcliffe to CIA. One can kind of argue about what he did when he was DNI, but I think that's probably a pick that's going to sail through the Senate, and ultimately, I think the more kind of people I talk to who have spoken with him, that he does not want to burn down the institution. That does not mean the president does not want to burn down the institution. We don't know about the kind of the leadership team at CIA, but in some sense, I think probably a lot of us are less alarmed about Ratcliffe than someone like, who I'll throw out there, Tulsi Gabbard as DNI. So let's talk about the Gabbard pick. First of all, what are your thoughts on that? And then we'll kind of dive in to some of the things that I think are really problematic.
Yeah, no, I was surprised by that, because I think there'll be a robust discussion, in terms of like confirmation stuff. But again, if you go back to looking at early on after the election, there was discussion about recession, or just sort of like getting people through without going through Senate confirmation processes. So it's possible that the vision and the initial named individuals was like, well, this is the way we're going to get sort of people in, and just sort of, we have a mandate, let's go and do what we need to do. In one sense, I would think, my take initially was like, this is a reward for political support. And, her name was also discussed for SecDef briefly, if you remember that. I mean, at least in the press space, right? Again, who knows, what is that a reverberation of an accurate thing? Is it not? I don't know. Again, yeah, I was pretty surprised.
Well, you have someone who has espoused kind of or used, Kremlin talking points, and of course her trip, I think in 2017, to see Bashar al-Assad in Syria, which is privately funded. I mean, all these things, frankly, and she deserves her day in front of the Senate, but they have to be asked. They have to be investigated, and certainly an FBI check has to be done. Or even she was on some kind of watch list briefly, which I don't even know what frankly that means. But and I think when senators reserve judgment, that's okay, because she has to be questioned. And I guess the issue that I would have would be, is that going to be circumvented? And if it is, I think that's, again, that's one of those kind of, break glass moments that you just don't understand, that I think is just so against the norm. But let me, so I guess a question I would have is, okay, Tulsi Gabbard is the DNI choice. The DNI, of course, some people argue that's not as important as the CIA director. I think I would agree with that, but she still has access to the keys to the kingdom. The DNI puts together the president's daily brief, which is kind of the holy grail of intelligence products with the most sensitive information in the U.S. government. And she also has declassifying authority as the DNI. She can declassify intelligence on her own. So, do you think that let's jump into the two key areas from our old world in the director of operations. One is on recruitment operations. I mean, I would imagine, if you're handling a penetration of the Syrian or Russian governments, you might have interesting discussions with your assets, who say, well, hold on a second. You promised me, Ed, you would keep me safe. That's the sacrosanct, kind of deal we have with those who spy for the United States against their governments. Do you think it would have an effect on recruitment operations? I mean, do we, and is that something that CIA case officers are going to have to kind of deal with?
Yeah, I think always, right? Like there's a wide array of things that go on in assets' minds that are a reflection of reality and a reflection of what they're seeing and what they're hearing and what they're thinking, and also the culture they come up in. So I think it would absolutely be something that a wide range of potential sources would say, okay, I need to understand what's happening here before I make this decision. I think you and I both know the individuals who are out there who make a choice to become, an asset. It is their choice. It is, I think, we sometimes you'll think that we're, charming and know how to like get somebody to say something that they really don't want to do. That's against their interests. I don't think that's the case. I think these guys and gals make decisions on their own. So of course this is going to factor in, our politics is going to factor into the decision to say, is this a stable scenario I'm walking myself in? What's at stake to me? What are my risk spaces? And if my government that I think is bad is somehow going to end up like in a favorable position or something, with an administration, that would make anyone think twice. I would think about making a decision to commit espionage or to continue to do so, or move on from there. So it would have an effect. I mean, I think it always has an effect.
When I was in Europe, I talked again, as I stated earlier, I talked to some former senior European officials, and I think it's going to have a chill on intelligence sharing as well. Again, not on every issue. I think on counterterrorism cooperation will be fine, but if you think of countries that we have cooperated with on Russia, for example, Five Eyes countries, where they they'll sanitize, but they will share some very sensitive human intelligence reporting. I can't see how MI6, the British government, is going to be as willing to share, from their crown jewels with the DNI, who has this kind of weird affinity, along with the president-elect, for Russia. I mean, you have these conversations in a setting, and there's a stiff upper lip at first, and maybe you'll see that on your trip, that everything's going to be fine. And then after a couple, bottles of wine, they'll tell you privately, which of course. I mean, this is just, the fact that we're even having this conversation. I mean, I want to do it for the viewers and the listeners, but for God's sakes, this is just kind of instinctive. Of course they're going to restrict, and they're going to do it in a way they're not going to tell us. They're just going to pull back slowly, but they have to, because they have that sacred obligation to their assets. I guess the question is, would we share sensitive intelligence on Russia from the bowels of Russia House with the government of Hungary? Of course we would not.
Right.
Because Orban is in essence, pro-Putin. And so I think that I do worry that this is going to have an effect on liaison operations. What's your thought?
No, I think you always have to look at that, particularly when we're getting into, the Hungary is a great example, because I think you get into sort of these like multilateral settings. Okay, so Hungary is a member of NATO. We have intelligence that gets shared with NATO for very specific reasons that make sense. But you always have to watch about, sort of in any relationship, while you're mindful of the penetrations and the leakage potential, you find a way to meet the objectives you need. I mean, I'm just thinking, the reason I'm saying it like that is I'm thinking of the Pakistan, context, which you and I know very well. It's always a challenge, and it's an ever-present thing there. When you're thinking about, all right, am I going to partner with a service? Look, we've talked about this in the Ukraine context. There's often assumptions in the past that sort of stymie sharing, that say, hey, they're potentially penetrated by the Russians. This is a decade ago. We have these conversations, and you say, all right, well, we still have a job to do. We have to figure out how to move forward. What can we share? How do we
Right.
maneuver through this? And what I'm saying is, it's a constant element of sharing. Like, it's a constant management element of sharing. And I would say that what we've got is a new set of layers to filter through and consider as we do this. And I'd certainly more so what you're suggesting, I think is right, is that some of our allies are going to say, okay, we just need to probably have some hard conversations with ourselves about what's the most important thing to us and how do we keep it safe. Yeah.
And one of the things about that I think maybe a lot of our listeners don't understand is that in the CIA, we have the kind of the stuff from spy movies or unilateral assets. This is when we recruit a North Korean or a Russian or Iranian. We run them alone. That's when you get dumped out of a backseat of a car and you wear disguise. But that's only half the job. The other half is liaison operations, and our liaison partners help us catch spies and give us incredible insights into Russia, Iran, North Korea, hard targets, counterintelligence issues. Like I said, counterproliferation, counterterrorism. So I do worry a bit about liaison operations, but I think this is also quite specific to these nominees. If it had been someone else than a Tulsi Gabbard, I don't think you have that problem. But this is someone who I actually expect in some ways, if, as you said before, if the Senate kind of holds true to tradition, that she will be voted down. There are a lot of very smart Republican Party foreign affairs professionals. The Senate is a serious place. I would imagine the senators behind the scenes are probably trying to figure out a way to have this not happen without kind of ensuring the wrath of kind of MAGA and Trump and getting primaried in some fashion. But there's too many serious people there, whether it's Susan Collins or Murkowski and Mitch McConnell as well. But we shall see. And when you talk about if Gabbard ends up making it, I think that's a very bad sign for the
again, like I said, I think it's about looking at like signal. Like I said, I'm trying to, as I make assessments, like I often do, is say, okay, what is happening? What are the possible implications? And kind of make decisions from there. You and I have a mutual friend who I think is kind of in an interesting position where any expression of what may come tends to generate him saying, be calm.
Oh yeah,
Until something bad happens, and then start thinking about what you should do about it. And I think it's just a mindset difference. But I think again, like I said, I'm sort of razor focused on what I think the signal is. Like I said, naming nominees is a signal, right? Like this is your team. This is your A team that you're wanting to have in place first. And the first person that has stepped back, is the DOJ pick with Gates. So we'll see what happens. I mean, there's 8 more weeks until inauguration. So there's quite a bit of probably jockeying going on behind the scenes of all these discussions and places.
So this is actually a great timing to have this because I'm jotting down notes, especially kind of signal versus noise. I have to go on Morning Joe tomorrow morning, and I'm sure they're going to want me to catastrophize. But I think there's going to be 4 stages of grief in this new life. It's catastrophizing, then you calm down, then you assess what happened, then you really decide what it means. So I think that I'm learning from you here. This is good. Let's jump just for a second to something though that I think, perhaps I will be stricken down by above for saying this, but there is not some good that could come of this. But look, the intelligence community does need reform.
Always.
It always does. And so, and perhaps Ratcliffe will be able to do that. I don't think Tulsi Gabbard is the right person, but if you think about our old job at the director of operations and what we call, this new ubiquitous technical surveillance environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said on this show before, I don't know if we talked about it last time, but I believe that because of this UTS environment, we have to do things a little differently, perhaps more use of non-official covered officers.
Yeah.
U.S. government, I got to be careful on this. I can say this, U.S. government platforms in which we have our unilateral officers might not be so smart. So I think the IC, and particularly on the operations side, does need reform. And it would, I would wish we would be, talking. I mean, there are Republican foreign policy people out there who could actually be good DNIs. And boy, would it be helpful if we had someone who actually could talk about that kind of reform. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's go back to the UTS thing because there's a different way I'm saying it too. But it's a sort of reflection of what you just said with respect to UTS, ubiquitous technical surveillance. We are ensconced in an information age, a data age. I mean, the iPhone is as old as 2006, 2007. I mean, we're really new into this, walking around with how many sensors on us, on any given moment and interacting with how many sensors. What I wonder about is to what extent, what percentage of secrets is our intelligence community protecting that aren't actually secret anymore if you just look hard enough.
Right.
Working some outside projects with commercial vendors who, come from the advertising world and national security sort of blended, looking at, ad tech, looking at all kinds of available data that's out there. It's amazing the stories that the data tells. And it tells stories that rhyme with things we used to do inside. And that really makes me, and I know Inside is having a robust discussion for years now on, what does all this technical surveillance mean offensively? What does it mean defensively? What does it mean for, a wide array of the types of operations we do, and how does it impact that? And what sort of, what becomes obsolete and what becomes enabled and opened up by it? I mean, because it's going to be all, and that's part of the evolution story that's constantly happening at all times. So that's, to me, the space, that's the most crucial space for evolution and reform and change, is looking at, really hard, what exactly are the secrets that are out there that we need to get? What exactly are the secrets out there that we need to keep? and how do we use our resources just on those things? And it's a constant scrub. And, you remember how many discussions we'd have with like, hey, this is, all of our number one priorities, or this is, where it's like 9 number one priorities, because again, there's just so many things going on around the globe that are important. And it starts to sound a little absurd because you're like, how can you have 9 number ones? But it's like, because you can't rank these things. And then at the same time, you have discussions about, you and I have been part of these before, global coverage, where you just have to be everywhere. And that's that. And you can have that mindset, but do we need to be everywhere? Do we need to be in every little place? Maybe. But like, those are the kind of conversations I want to hear about when it comes to reform, is how do we get better and better at protecting and stealing secrets at the same time. Now, get back to some of the other figures that are out there. There's a really, you probably saw it was like a 7-minute clip moving its way around Twitter over the last couple of days. It was Senator Mike Rounds from South Dakota. Did you see that one talking about? It was unequivocal support for why Ukrainian victory is crucial to U.S. interests. Unequivocal condemnation of Putin. It's worth the close watch a couple of times and sharing with friends, because it's also the kind of policy utterances and signal I want to hear right now. It's because it's coming from a sitting senator. It's who's also got a strong relationship with the president-elect. To me, that's an important signal as well.
So, and here's the part that I don't understand. This is getting back. I'm going to go back to my catastrophizing. But like the American electorate, look, Donald Trump won, but we're also seeing now this announcement yesterday with 20-25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. This which would wreck free trade agreements. This is insane. This is going to drive up the cost of everything. Same thing with generally the U.S. Public support for Ukraine. Yet certainly not part of any part of the kind of Trump MAGA platform. You have Donald Jr. Mocking Zelensky on Twitter, and so I do wonder what's going to happen with Ukraine. That's my next question for you. And so again, it's just for the listeners, Ed and I are involved in kind of numerous signal chats or WhatsApp chats or text messages with kind of old friends. All wondering what's going to happen with Ukraine, and is there any possibility that Trump actually doesn't go through on his campaign promises, which were very real, in terms of cutting U.S. support. So, what are your thoughts on that now? And I guess maybe it's along the lines of what you said before: signal versus noise.
Well, no, and it is. That's how I'm thinking about it. And when he says those things specifically out of his mouth about Ukraine, that's a signal of his preference. Now, preferences can be influenced over time, and that's why I thought it was important to see Senator Rounds' voice. You may have seen the former Taiwanese president just a couple of days ago also, said that, in response to a U.S. it was a general saying that, hey, we're sort of like running up against the limit on things like Patriot missiles for defending Taiwan. And again, it's an ex-president of Taiwan, but her take was, the U.S. should prioritize supporting Ukraine over Taiwan for all the reasons which, seem obvious to me, but are in debate, which is, failing Ukraine is going to enable, China to go after Taiwan.
Right.
The success of Ukraine defending itself is one of the most important things to sending clear messages to the rest of the world, to include to China, that they can't overreach. So those voices. So right now is the time to influence. I'm sure you saw, and again, like, I don't worry so much about, if Don Jr. says something. It is his son, but I kind of expect that kind of stuff, and I do put that in the noise category. I didn't, obviously, how I feel about Ukraine, and I want to see Ukraine victorious here. While this is also noise, sometimes it's important. You saw sort of Joe Rogan, who has quite a following, with his podcast, made some comments the other day, sort of like F Zelensky. I don't want to die. Like, it was very stark. It was very catastrophizing. It was sort of saying like, 0 to nuclear war, and it's actually not nuclear war, it's nuclear Armageddon. I think that's one of those absurdities of this narrative constantly, as it goes from 0 to like literally everyone on earth is going to die, and that just absolutely makes no sense. But anyway, the response from Klitschko, if you saw, he said basically like, hey, you might want to hear a Ukrainian voice here, and have a debate. Like, let's have a discussion, and we'll tell you, like, I live here. I don't need to live here. I'm, worth quite a bit of money, and I'm not sitting here defending my country so I get nuked.
Just for our listeners, this is the current mayor of Kyiv, correct?
I think it was his brother.
It was his brother who said it.
Yeah. Okay. I think it was Vladimir. That's actually an important discussion. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that a lot, and like to see it with that kind of a distro. I think that's important for people to hear. And that doesn't mean it's going to influence policy, but it's important to get that into the public space, right? I mean, this is that whole, what does Musk call Twitter now? Like the public square, which, I'm
long gone from Twitter.
I'm
enjoying Blue Sky much more, I must say. But on what you're saying now, so I agree with you that this is, and this goes to the debate that we've talked about almost every day in some of our other discussions, is that we're trying to find ways in which you can appeal to Trump on why Ukraine is important. This shouldn't be your Afghanistan. You want to be looking tough with Putin, and you've seen NATO Secretary General went to Mar-a-Lago and he kind of said all these things. I do wonder if this is all wishful thinking, and we're kind of in this strange period now, and Trump is enjoying himself as people are groveling, and that's what we are all doing, frankly, begging and groveling. And so will the Marco Rubios and Mike Waltzes prevail? Or will kind of the MAGA base who and according to our friend Adam Kinzinger has said very clearly, Trump detests Ukraine. So and I think sometimes we forget about that. So we're gonna I guess the bottom line is this wishful thinking? Is this Stockholm syndrome? Or
no. There's a lot of, like always, there's a lot of work to be done, right? And if we're at a state down the road where we're looking back and it was all for naught. Okay, fine. But, I say this to a lot of people, the gravestone of Ukraine has had its death, date marked on it. I don't know how many times and lined out and written again and lined out and written again. And I believe in the people there. They're fighting their backs against the wall. They are going to fight. They're not going to stop. I don't think, I think that, there's a lot of players in the European space who have a significant say in the contours of this war and know that they need to step up. And the politics, the political class is full of cowards, right? Or all around. But there's plenty of people that know they need to step up. We see that with the Baltics. You see that with Poland. You see that with the Nordics. You see that with the Netherlands. You see that with France. You see that with Britain. And, I'm never going to say, because I never like the word, I don't like the word hope. So I'm not going to say there's hope that this could come together. And I think that's just not the way to think. There's work to be done. There's constant work to be done. It's advocacy work and it's actual things. It's not just words, because, industry in Europe has to figure itself out. Even if it's just country by country, like can't just be like all of Europe has to do X, because that's just simply not a coherent blob that's going to do one thing. But there's plenty of countries that can support, and it won't be at the same rate that we support. So I don't think the end is binary. Well, that's the wrong way of saying it too. End isn't even the right word. I mean, I don't see an end coming right now. What I see is just a continuation of something with different contours than it currently has into the future. And I don't know, and that's even in a scenario where there's like sort of an executive order says, hey, we're not helping at all anymore. That's it. Done. That's not the end of the story.
I think you're right in the sense, our friend Michael Weiss has said this, many times, said, okay, so this is the reality we have now. So we're not going to kind of lay down and die. If you're a supporter of Ukraine before, you're going to keep on fighting in some fashion now. Yeah. And these, I think that we were dealt cards that are not ideal think that's putting it kindly. And it is what it is, and just kind of move forward. We have about 7 minutes left, so I'm gonna ask you 3 questions.
Yeah.
I just came up with this kind of rather brilliant strategy now. And so, number one, it's kind of overall. Look, we've heard Trump and his allies, and this is part of the noise, but he's talked about retribution against the IC.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many times I've read about how much he dislikes the CIA, does not trust CIA, blames us for all sorts of, or our old place for all sorts of ills. And frankly, at the end of his administration, it's soured even on receiving intelligence briefings, although I understand he is now receiving them. What are your thoughts? Do you think there's going to be any kind of retribution against the intelligence community, which even would include things like loyalty tests for officers, the imposition of Schedule F for some of our senior leadership on the 7th floor? What is your sense of what's going to happen?
Yeah, I don't know enough about Schedule F. I'd actually like to. What I probably should have done is read. I'd actually like to read it and try to understand it with my sort of legal eyes. I think retaliation, in one sense, you see sort of. We've heard about like swatting of family members of people. Like there's a whole spectrum of things that can certainly happen when people's names are out there, right? And you are obviously acutely aware of that. But inside, I mean, the deck chairs are going to get moved radically without question. I mean, I think that should be expected, right? Because people are going to want to sort of put their people in various places. The question is going to be, is it, a programmatic loyalty test? Again, I kind of put that and maybe this isn't the right way to think through it, but I put that in the noise column until I hear something specific from, friends of mine who are inside saying, hey, there's rumblings that X is going to happen, because I haven't heard that. And I do talk to people, and you do too. So I don't know if you've heard different, but I haven't heard. I mean, those are sort of like grenades thrown into the information ecosystem. Say, okay, is this something that's coming, or is this something that's just sort of thrown in? And I don't know.
So what's interesting is that because the Trump campaign, or the president-elect and all the people there, they've not signed on to any of this GSA paperwork. Mm-hmm. So Ratcliffe actually and others cannot go even meet with the agency. There's been no contact. Mm-hmm. And so, I think we just don't know yet what they're going to do. I think, but let's go back to the noise versus signal. So there's a lot of noise. What's a signal? Well, who's going to be deputy director? And I think that's something we should look at, very carefully. If we assume Ratcliffe is not going to burn the place down. And again, people have told me very recently that he is more of an institutionalist. He cares about the organization. I'll take them at face value on that. But the deputy director is going to be really important. So I think we should see on that. Let me go to next question, number 2.
Well, yeah, and my comment, on that real quick, because I think you and I had this conversation before, or maybe it was with somebody else. In my view, I would like to see somebody in the deputy director slot that has done the job before.
That's right.
Because somebody who's because if you do have a steward who's like, okay, I want to like drive some kind of a valuable evolutionary change, you want somebody who, my view always has been, I think our strongest directors have been the people that have political juice and connectivity in Washington, up and out, so to speak. And then they're best served by somebody who's served on the inside, and who can sort of see through 100%. All the mirrors, the funhouse mirrors that get thrown up various ways that you and I have seen in our careers.
And I would argue too that it's not that's, and again, trust me, I have zero influence on this. In fact, if I ever recommended everything, it's guaranteed it would not happen. But it's almost better getting someone from the inside serving right now rather than bringing in someone from the past. I get a sense that's probably what we're going to see as a former come in who just, again, the place, the agency, the world has just changed too much when we talk about things like this.
And I know, look, we've always, and this is something too that I want to throw on the table too, because we've had an organization for at least, our careers that generally has two appointees, right? You have the director, confirmed, right? Like, so you have the director and you have the general counsel.
Yep.
Other agencies don't have that. And we've sort of been very clear, like that's, I guess that was, during Director Porter Goss's time, there was more people brought into different positions, right? Wasn't that the sort of
Well,
thing.
he brought aides with him, and that's, generally, when directors come to the agency, they might take one or two people with, but not much.
But I'm wondering if that changes. It's not inherently bad. It depends on, obviously the devil's always going to be in the details. But I'm not saying it's good either. I'm just saying it's a thing. Like I could see that changing, and that will be a shock to the system. I think internally, the way we do business, I think that'll generate a little bit of a shock to the system.
Last point on this, Project 2025 has a whole piece on intelligence. And I think if you look at some of the authors of that, they're kind of on the fringe. They're a little bit out there.
Do you know who the authors are?
Fred Fleitz, Sam Faddis, people who have a very dim view of the current intelligence community, and I think who want to see kind of real radical change. And again, will Project 2025 be implemented or not? Two other questions. I don't know if you've done this. I think you and I have talked about it. Something that I do 2 or 3 times a month. I think I'm going next week. I have another lecture kind of at a local university, but it's the idea of going and talking to kind of the next generation, of passing the torch. I talk to a lot of schools, and I have certainly quite a busy schedule in doing that. So I guess the question for you, and I've kind of pondered this too, given the kind of the what might be a very chaotic situation in the intelligence community, is this a career that you would advocate?
Yeah.
Someone at a university, and I will say to you that I've actually had second thoughts about this now, because I've done this for years. I don't know the answer to that, and I think that remains to be seen, because what is going to happen to our old outfit? How politicized will it get? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I look, I'm always going to advocate for good people to serve their country. That's something that's my values and down to my core. And again, I keep saying this signal noise thing, and I don't mean to say it till I not answer, the point of the question, but like, I'm not, I wouldn't just discourage someone from applying at this point. There's too much to do. The world is absolutely on fire. Our adversaries are absolutely aligned against us right now, and it's more important than ever. Now, understanding if you join now, before you even know what you're doing, it's going to take 5 years,
right?
To understand. But again, like, we have to have a constant flow of people in that sort of, that clip, so to speak, working through, because we'll have bigger problems down the road. We can't not have that flow of good people coming in. I think the stakes of that are way too high.
Well, I want to share your optimism. I'm going to continue to share a little bit of that optimism, but I think, again, it's signal versus noise. We'll see, how if and how the intelligence community gets an absolute hatchet taken to it. But again, January 20th is coming up. And one of the things that's really interesting about this time period, there's actually too much time right now. I mean, this is a time for so much worry and speculation and catastrophizing, and you also have a president-elect who is enjoying this. I mean, there's no way that kind of the MAGA world is not thrilled with people at Justice and the FBI and at CIA and at DOD kind of in a bit of a panic. I mean, we haven't even talked about DOD with the idea of these panels of former generals to decide on loyalty tests, and even a nominee who I think has a questionable past and who doesn't believe that females should be in combat in the U.S. military when they're flying F-35s and in artillery units on the front lines. And so I think that, and I did see Alyssa Slotkin, our old colleague who now is the senator-elect in Michigan. She said that she's been talking to female cadets at service academies, saying, "Well, hold on a second. I do want to go into combat, and here's the Secretary of Defense designate saying that we don't deserve this." So I do think it's worth paying attention to the young people, because, as you said, it's passing the torch, but it's we have to have a constant flow of great people coming
in. And if he remains the nominee, he's going to have to defend that on the Hill,
right?
And if he's confirmed, that's a signal. And if changes then get made internally, that's also a signal. At this point, it's a statement by somebody who's doesn't have, I guess, he doesn't have the sort of policy experience at all. So let's see.
Let's see is right. Well, look, we're at the time now, unfortunately, where we got to kind of take a break. Ed, I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you want to consider coming on again. We'll do this after January 20th, perhaps, and see if it was either the catastrophizing. Well, again, I'm going to go back to catastrophizing, and then I calm down, assessing, and then deciding. So we'll be in the decision phase there to see if it was signal or noise. I want to thank everyone out there for listening. DSR will be back later this week with more of our regularly scheduled podcasts, and we hope you'll join us for them, and then join me again next week for the Above Average Intelligence Show. Ed Bogan, you, as I've said many times before, I embarrass you always. You're a genuine American hero. No one will know and can know what you've done to help protect America, but that's just a statement I'm very happy to make. I'm honored to be your friend.
Thank you.
Hope you join us again.
All right, brother.
Thanks so much.
Take care.